When the movie The Conjuring was released, it quickly became a landmark in horror cinema. The chilling scenes, well-crafted scares, and the presence of demonic figures left thousands of viewers terrified. But like every Hollywood production, what made it to the screen was just a fraction, carefully adapted, toned down, and in some parts completely altered, of what actually happened in the life of the Perron family. What few people know is that behind the cameras lies a story much denser, crueler, and more disturbing. A sequence of events that couldn't be fully translated into film, whether due to time constraints, censorship, or simply because the truth, in this case, surpasses any fictional script. And then comes the inevitable question: to what extent did the movie tell the truth? And what, in fact, was left hidden in the shadows of this story? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver these videos to more people, and for me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. When we talk about haunted houses, it's inevitable that The Conjuring comes to mind. That movie marked generations, brought scares, tension. But did you know that what appears on screen is only a fraction, and actually a much lighter version of what happened in real life? That's right, and it all starts with the house itself. Located in Harrisville, Rhode Island, it might seem at first glance like just an old colonial farmhouse, one of those you find along back roads in the US countryside. But the truth is that this place carries nearly 3 centuries of tragedies, deaths, and stories that make any movie look like child's play. And that's no exaggeration. The film gives the impression that the house became haunted because of a curse cast by a supposed witch, Bathsheba. But in reality, the rabbit hole goes much deeper. Historical documents, public records, and accounts from former residents show that long before the Perron family arrived, that land was already marked by a disturbing sequence of events. We're talking about hangings, suicides, drownings, and unexplained deaths that occurred over generations. Coincidence? Honestly, hard to believe. And you know what makes it even more unsettling? Realizing that these tragedies don't follow a typical pattern. It's not one of those stories where a terrible crime happened, and that's it. No, it's as if, with each new family, the house wakes up, and it all starts again. And the inevitable question arises: is it the house that chooses the people, or is it something much bigger than that? If in the movie the terror arises almost immediately, in real life it's much more insidious. It starts small: a door that shuts by itself, objects that disappear, whispers in the middle of the night when everyone should be asleep. And the smell. Reports mention a strong stench of rotten flesh appearing out of nowhere, without explanation. Can you imagine the terror of waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that you're not alone? Even though you are? And it's not me saying this. Andrea Perron, one of the daughters who lived there, wrote an entire trilogy describing everything the family went through. Things you simply don't see in the movie. And it's not because they forgot to include it, it's because, most likely, not even the film industry wanted, or could, show what really happened inside that house. And here's a detail that almost no one talks about. Long before any house existed on that land, the indigenous peoples of the region already avoided that place. And this isn't legend, it's history. Those lands were considered cursed, places of banishment, of spiritual isolation, locations that, according to them, were points where the veil between this world and the other side was extremely thin. And then comes the question that won't go away. Is the house haunted because it was built there? Or was it built there precisely because that was a concentration point for something that should never have been disturbed? You notice that the movie tries to touch on this, but it treats evil as something that has a name, a face, a clear villain. In real life, it wasn't quite like that. What the family faced didn't seem to have a single source. It wasn't an entity, it wasn't a specific presence. It was as if the house itself, or even the very ground it was built on, was the manifestation of evil in its purest form. And this is, perhaps, the most unsettling part of this entire story. Because if in the movie there's a solution, identify the spirit, perform the exorcism, solve the problem, in real life, the problem had no name. And if it has no name, how do you fight it? How do you protect your family from something that has no shape, no face? That simply is. And it's exactly at this point that a figure emerges, one that cinema turned into a villain, but who, in real life, might be much more than that. or perhaps something completely different from what you were led to believe. Who, after all, was Bathsheba Sherman? If you know this story because of the movie, you probably remember Bathsheba Sherman being portrayed as the main culprit behind everything bad that happens in that house. A supposed witch who allegedly committed a horrific sacrifice, offering her own child in a satanic ritual before taking her own life and sealing a curse. But was it really like that? Let's look at the facts. Bathsheba Thayer Sherman existed. This is not fiction. She was born in 1812, lived in the Harrisville area, was married, had children, and led an apparently ordinary life. But at some point, everything changed. She became the target of rumors and accusations of practicing witchcraft. And this didn't come out of nowhere. The death of a baby under her care, under extremely strange circumstances, lit the fuse. What do the records say? The child was found with a sewing needle embedded in its skull. To the community of the time, this was not an accident, nor a tragedy, it was witchcraft. It was a pact. But despite all the commotion, Bathsheba was never formally convicted. There wasn't enough evidence. And then comes that uncomfortable question. Was she innocent? Or was she just another person who escaped the limitations of the justice system back then? The movie portrays Bathsheba as the sole source of all the evil that manifests in that house. But when we dive into the real accounts from the Perron family, we realize that this version is far from reality. In truth, Bathsheba was just one of many presences that inhabited that place. And if she stood out, it was precisely because she was the cruelest. Reports describe a female entity obsessed with the family's matriarch, Carolyn. She seemed to be the main target. Carolyn would wake up with bruises, feel invisible touches, be pulled, pushed, and sometimes she would simply pass out for no apparent reason. But then comes a disturbing question. If Bathsheba had been dead for so long, what exactly made her presence so intense in that place? This is where a much more sinister theory comes in, one the movie never even touched on. What if Bathsheba wasn't, in fact, the origin of the curse? What if she was actually another victim of whatever inhabits that land? After all, there are historical records showing that this ground was already avoided long before the settlers arrived. Could it be that, just like the Perron family, she too was pushed to the edge? And when we look at how her life ended, the doubts only grow. Unlike what was shown in the film, Bathsheba did not hang herself. She died of natural causes in 1885, technically from a stroke. But those who saw her body described an abnormal rigidity, as if she had been petrified. At the time, this was considered more than strange, a sign that her death was not exactly natural. Even after her death, Bathsheba's name was never forgotten. Entire generations grew up hearing stories about her. To some, she was a witch. To others, an innocent woman, unjustly persecuted by a society driven by fear, ignorance, and superstition. And if there is any truth in between, it remains buried, hidden within the very silence of that house. And perhaps this is the most disturbing point of all. Because if she wasn't the beginning, then who or what was? What existed there that had the power to turn a real woman into a legend that has crossed centuries and still lives today in the corridors of that house? And more, was Bathsheba just one of the many faces that this entity took on? Or perhaps is the evil that inhabits that place something that doesn't even have a face nor a name and continues waiting patiently for anyone who dares to cross its path? The movie did a brilliant job of scaring and captivating its audience. There's no denying that. But if you think it showed you everything the Perron family went through, I'm sorry to say, but the truth is much darker. And perhaps it couldn't have been fully told. What almost no one knows is that several of the most disturbing events were simply left out. And that wasn't by accident. Some parts were left out because they were far too heavy, even by horror movie standards. Other parts because not even the screenwriters knew exactly how to translate into images things that go beyond what our logic can comprehend. One of the most shocking accounts involves the presence of male entities in the house. And we're not talking about simple shadows or noises. These were physical, tangible presences that even went as far as assaulting members of the family, especially the women. Touching, grabbing, pulling. At certain moments, it felt like whatever it was had crossed any boundary of the supernatural, entering a territory even more terrifying, something that shouldn't even be possible. And anyone who truly knows the Perron story is aware that what happened to Carolyn went far beyond anything any adaptation dared to show. The movie depicts a scene of possession and levitation, right? But in real life, it was even more violent, more traumatic. Witnesses claim that during one of the most intense manifestations, her body was thrown so violently against the floor that she couldn't move properly for days. And the physical traumas, those never fully went away. Another detail that the film softened a lot were the constant episodes of strangulation attempts. Yes, that happened, and it wasn't once or twice. There were invisible hands squeezing necks, pressing down on chests, to the point where family members would wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, struggling to breathe. And then you wonder, how was this never shown? How did this part of the story simply vanish from the version that made it to us? And the answer is simple. Because that crossed any line of what the audience could handle without it triggering outrage, panic, or perhaps something even worse. In fact, there are reports that, at certain moments, the farm animals would react before the humans even noticed anything. Dogs barking at nothing, horses rearing as if they were seeing something, or running away desperately for no apparent reason. And anyone who has ever experienced something paranormal knows this all too well. When the animals sense it, it's because it's already there, and it's already too late. And if you think that after the spiritual session conducted by the Warrens, everything was resolved, well, that's not what really happened. The ritual, which the movie presents as the grand solution, was in fact one of the most dangerous moments the family ever faced. And after it, the manifestations didn't just continue. In some moments, they got even worse. And all of this leads to an uncomfortable reflection. If what was shown on screen already left you unsettled, then what would it be like to face the truth? A truth so heavy, so disturbing, that not even fiction dared to portray it. And that raises an even darker question. If not even a ritual conducted by supernatural experts could solve it, then is there really anything capable of breaking that curse? Or maybe the evil was never really interested in being banished, because it always belonged to that place? For many people, the exorcism scene in The Conjuring is undoubtedly one of the most impactful moments of the film. That sequence of screams, levitation, breaking chairs, bodies being thrown, it feels like the perfect climax to a horror story. But in real life, what happened was very different, and honestly much more terrifying. What few people know is that it wasn't technically an exorcism. In fact, what the Warrens conducted was a spiritual communication ritual, a kind of session to try to understand what was happening, establish contact, and perhaps find a way out. But things spiraled out of control in a way that not even they, with all their experience in the supernatural, were prepared for. That night, the entire room turned into a true battlefield. Carolyn, who had already been a constant target of the manifestations, seemed like someone else. Her body stiffened, her eyes rolled back, and suddenly, she began speaking in languages that no one there could understand. Voices that didn't sound human came out of her, mixed with screams and guttural sounds that echoed throughout the entire house. Witnesses described that at a certain moment, her body was slammed to the floor with a force that would be impossible for any human to replicate. And unlike what the movie shows, where everything seems to have an almost choreographed sequence, there was no control here, no script. It was pure chaos, a fight for survival against something that no one knew how to name. The most sinister detail of that night was realizing that this wasn't simply an expression of rage or spiritual revolt. It seemed, in fact, like a clear attempt at destruction, and not symbolic, physical. The way Carolyn was dragged, thrown, suffocated made it evident that the goal wasn't to scare, it was to harm, and maybe even to kill. Roger Perron himself, who until then had reluctantly accepted the Warrens' help, completely lost control. Desperate, he interrupted the ritual, pulled Carolyn off the floor, and threw Ed and Lorraine out of the house. And here's an important detail. This part was never shown in the movie. Because, in reality, after that night, the relationship between the Perron family and the Warrens was never the same again. Another point that is rarely mentioned is that after the ritual, Carolyn spent days unable to get up. Bruises, body pain, episodes of amnesia. And more than that, it seemed that a part of her simply didn't come back. Andrea Perron, one of the daughters, describes this very clearly in the books she wrote. That event left physical, emotional, and according to her, spiritual scars that never faded. And anyone who thinks that the ritual was the end is mistaken. The manifestations didn't stop. In fact, they changed. They became more subtle, more sneaky, and in a way even crueler. Because if before the terror manifested in screams, shoves, and loud bangs, After the ritual, it began hiding in silence, in dark corners, in almost inaudible whispers. As if that thing had learned that sometimes what frightens the most is what you cannot see. This even raises a question that many paranormal researchers still debate to this day. By trying to communicate with that entity, did the Warrens unintentionally give it more strength? More access? Did that ritual, which was supposed to be an act of protection, actually break a barrier that should never have been touched? And if that really happened, the question that remains is even more disturbing. What exactly was unleashed that night? And would it ever be possible to close that door again? Anyone who watches The Conjuring usually walks away with that sense of relief at the end. That idea that after the ritual, the evil was gone, the house was at peace, and everything went back to normal. But that's not exactly what happened. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. After that night when the ritual nearly killed Carolyn, the Perron family had no peace. The manifestations didn't disappear. They changed. They became quieter, more intelligent, more constant, as if whatever it was had learned to hide better, and maybe feed off the family's very resistance. In the years that followed, the Perrons went through a true psychological war. Doors continued slamming shut by themselves. Objects would vanish, and then reappear in impossible places. Whispers echoed through the rooms, sometimes so faint that you didn't know if you were actually hearing them or just imagining it. But when the whole family hears it, it's not imagination, right? And the most disturbing part was the shadows. They would appear in corners, on the stairs, in the hallways. They had no defined shape, but you knew they were there, because even without a face, even without a body, you could feel them. It was that chill starting at the back of your neck and running down your spine. That primal instinct your brain can't explain, but your body understands. And contrary to what many people assume, they didn't leave immediately. The Perron family stayed in that house for another 10 years. 10 years living with it daily. And then comes the question no one likes to ask. Why? Why didn't they just leave? And the answer is as sad as it is frightening. They had nowhere else to go. Sell the house? Impossible. Who would want to buy a place where the sellers themselves look you in the eye and say, "You don't want to live here"? Financially, they were trapped. Spiritually as well. Because it wasn't just the house that was contaminated. It was as if that energy had rooted itself in them. Wherever they went, it seemed to follow. And the most unsettling part is realizing that when the Perrons finally managed to leave, the house didn't go quiet. Quite the opposite. New residents also began reporting the same phenomena. Noises, banging, footsteps upstairs, when absolutely no one was there. Objects flying. And of course, the shadows. They never left. This raises a question the movie never wanted, or perhaps never dared, to explore. The problem was never exactly the family. It was never just about the Perrons. Because if after them others experienced the same, then the evil wasn't attached to the people. It was attached to the place. And then comes that deeply uncomfortable thought. Could it be that somehow, that house, or even that piece of land, functions like some kind of magnet? A portal? A spiritual knot where things that should never be here accumulate? And if that's the case, then who in their right mind would dare cross that door today? Looking at that house today is, at the very least, unsettling. On the outside, it's still the same old farmhouse, surrounded by crooked trees, silent fields, and that eerie atmosphere of isolation that makes any visitor feel watched. But now it's no longer just a home. It's a destination, a pilgrimage site for ghost hunters, curiosity seekers, and paranormal investigators from all over the world. After the story gained fame, especially following the release of The Conjuring, the house was purchased by new owners. And unlike what many people would do, demolish the place, salt the ground, and never look back, they decided to open the doors. Today, anyone can book a visit, spend a few hours, or, for those brave enough, spend an entire night inside. And we're not just talking about jump scares or spooky stories told in the dark. Those who enter that house quickly realize that something there is still alive. Visitors report doors slamming shut on their own, footsteps upstairs, when there's absolutely no one there, whispers that seem to circle around the rooms, and the classic, shadows crossing the hallways as if they never left. Some even attempt to capture EVPs, those recordings of supernatural voices. And what's most impressive is that, in many of these recordings, responses appear. Whispers, muffled screams, Words that, when you listen to them, send a chill straight down your spine. And there's no editing, no post-production effects. It's the kind of thing that, once heard, never leaves your head. Lights flicker, objects move, and on some nights, there are reports of visitors simply passing out inside the house, with no explanation. People who swear they felt an overwhelming pressure on their chest, as if something was literally sitting on top of them. And anyone familiar with this type of manifestation knows exactly what that usually means. And you know that sense of relief the movie gives you at the end, like everything was resolved. Forget it, because the reality is that the house was never at peace. And maybe it never will be. It feels like the evil there isn't interested in leaving. In fact, it's as if it feeds on those who dare to enter. The most disturbing part is that the reports from the current owners and visitors match, almost perfectly, the exact same reports from the Perron family decades earlier. The same sounds, the same knocks, the same shadows, as if time inside that place simply doesn't move. As if it's trapped, frozen, repeating itself endlessly. And as much as investigations try to find answers, the truth is that no one has ever been able to explain it. No scientific analysis, no attempt at debunking has ever closed the case. Because no matter how hard you try to rationalize, how do you explain a locked door opening by itself? An object flying toward you when there's no one around? A name whispered into your ear when you're alone? At this point, it's not even about believing or not. Because anyone who enters that house leaves with one uncomfortable certainty. It's not just a story. It's not just a legend. It's real. And more, it's still there, waiting, watching, as if every new visitor is, in fact, just another piece in a game that no one understands. And then, the inevitable question lingers in the air. Would you spend a night inside? And if you did, would you come out the same way you went in? The story of the Perron family, the house in Harrisville, and everything tied to that piece of land goes far beyond what the movie ever showed. Behind the cameras, there's a reality that is, at the very least, disturbing. A sequence of events so absurd, so unsettling, that it defies all logic. Because if the evil that inhabits that place has survived centuries of banishment attempts, exorcisms, rituals, and even time itself, then maybe the truth is even crueler than any fiction has ever dared to tell. This story is just one piece. And one day, maybe you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, don't forget to subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. And don't forget to share it. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.